party in on the truth soon, no later than when Vega was taken care of. Then he'd need to decide. Did they want to keep being Feldway's puppets, or did they want to regain their complete freedom and join Ramires's side? If Dino and his friends refused the proposal, she couldn't do much about that. She didn't want to kill her friend, so instead she planned to throw him into the labyrinth prison, a bit of the labyrinth that she remodeled for the purpose. She had based it on the secret of the infinite corridor, something Rimuru had obtained from one place or another, and it worked by constantly changing its spatial coordinates, preventing all escape. The labyrinth had become a bit of a rough place as of late. More and more idiots were going in and wrecking the joint, so Ramirez wanted a way or two to punish them. It looked to her like she'd get to test them out real soon. Having to recalculate coordinates all the time to prevent escape was a little irritating, but it still beat killing Dino and his friends. But what Ramirez really wanted to see wasn't anything as trivial as that. Come on, Dino. Let's carry on like idiots again and conduct some more experiments together. All right? That was her hope. She believed in the strategy that Rimuru devised, and she prayed that Dino could become her friend again. The feelings came across to everybody present, and now they were inspiring Shuna to act. Would you mind if I tried to persuade Dino's party? She asked, smiling gently at Ramirez. Huh? Ramirez gave her a close look. Shuna was the true leader of this nation of monsters, along with the labyrinth it housed. Not even Rimuru was able to turn down a request from her. She was always there if you needed help, and most importantly, if you wanted to keep your allowance, and be fed by the kitchen. Those were both her domains. Are you sure, Shuna? Ramirez and Benimaru both gave her a concerned look. But Shuna just grinned and nodded back. Dino was exhausted. They were having a break at the moment. He had already been killed 4 times, and the experience was wearing him out. There's more where that came from, said Beretta, who offered him a resurrection bracelet. There was no doubt a devilish smile underneath his mask. He was a demon after all, thought Dino, his eyes turning toward the heavens. After dying so many times, he was starting to get used to it. He was beginning to accept the situation he was in. In fact, it was starting to feel more and more pleasant, although he assumed this was just in his imagination. Why was Ramirez doing this? If it was just for revenge, she wouldn't have gone this far. She was the type to hold a grudge, yes, but she also had a memory like a sieve, so she was normally never this persistent. Nah, it's really not surprising at all, huh? It's just her as usual. Dino chided himself a little. But yeah. Ramirez is angry because I'm doing whatever Feldway tells me to. But I can't do anything about it. As long as I have an angelic power like this, I have to do his bidding. With ultimate dominion, there was never any room for back talk. It didn't deprive Dino of his free will, which was fortunate, but that was only because he was playing along with it. If he rankled Feldway any more than he already had, things could get a lot worse quickly. In his current state, he was able to defy his will for only a single moment at a time. In that way, if he could turn against Feldway at just the right moment, he ought to be able to help Rimuru and Ramirez if needed. He had already been leaking information to Ramirez and the others, making sure Vega never picked up on it. He felt he'd become a pretty valuable informant and deserved to be treated a little better than this. I mean, this is just her looking to see what kind of effect dying has on this power, isn't it? But ultimate dominion isn't that simple, you know. If it could be removed, he would have done it already. After probing his state at the moment of death, he found that Feldway's power was tightly bound to his soul. To be precise, the ultimate skill Astarte, Lord of High Heaven, had taken root in his soul, controlling his body's internal command center. The only way to break this was to completely erase the authority at the root, in other words, to die. That or overwrite it with some other ability, but that's impossible, though. Dino did have another skill. The unique skill Sloth, to be exact, although it had since evolved into the ultimate skill Belphegor, Lord of Sloth. The power seemed to embody the essence of Dino himself. If he could set it on Astarte, It might just be possible to jam Ultimate Dominion, but he hesitated to try it. Like, if it actually works, Feldway's definitely gonna find out, so. And when he did, Dino's friends Pico and Gasha were doomed to have their free will taken away and become puppets. They'd try to capture Dino, and they wouldn't be able to avoid a fight then. He wasn't that close to Mai, but he didn't want to just abandon her, either. She took care of her companions, that much was clear by now, and Dino had a certain sense of ease when he was around her. She was better as a friend than as an enemy, at least. Dino was kind that way, despite it all. He didn't want to see his friends get hurt, and he definitely didn't want to be the one doing the hurting. He might be able to escape from this thrall alone, but that wasn't good enough for him. So I just gotta keep things as they are, huh? But just when he was about to give up for good. Is that really what you want? Said Dino. Can't you save everybody at the same time? The voice seemed to encompass everything around it, a blanket that gave him a sense of security. This must be Shuna, he hazily thought. But why was she talking to him? Was he imagining it, or was this real? I mean, yeah, it's damn scary whenever Shuna is mad, but her speaking to me this kindly? That was even scarier, as far as he was concerned. This wasn't a question at all. It was an order. He was being browbeaten into doing it, and if he replied that he couldn't, he could imagine how disappointed she'd be. As lazy as he was, even Dino knew he didn't have that in him. So there was just one answer. He had no choice but to do it. Besides, he had a lot to lose but a lot to gain as well. He steeled himself, recalling Ramiriz's smile. Yes. That's exactly right. Why was I hemming and hawing over this? I'll give it a shot, and if it doesn't work, I'll quit then. But just whining about it and not doing anything? That's not like me at all. Dino's hesitation was gone. It didn't really matter if that was actually Shuna or not. What did was that he made up his mind to follow that voice. He had decided to take action before he lost his motivation for good. Dot. Clenching his fist, he punched himself on the cheek as hard as he could. There was no pain, but it was still an eye-opening sensation. There was a considerable amount of damage, numbing his brain, but all the worries that had been smoldering inside of him had been whisked away. Okay, guys. I've made up my mind. I'd rather take my chances and win my freedom instead of living all half-assed like this. The loud declaration was met with cold stares by Pico and Gasha. It's about damn time, Gasha spat. You're so slow that it took dying 4 times for it to dawn on you? Pico added, yeah, after you kept telling us to reserve our energy and everything. What were you doing this whole time? Like, you're so trashed, you couldn't run away from here even if you wanted to. The verbal bullets came careening toward Dino. He was about to ask for their trust, but all these accusations were about to make him burst into tears instead. So you finally made up your mind, Mai said, driving the final blow. You really are the most indecisive man I know, you realize that? Those were her true feelings, as much as they cut into Dino's heart. For him, though, they were nothing short of a compliment. Yeah, well, you won't find anyone as unenthusiastic about stuff to the very end as me, you know? The smug response received a pretty cold reaction. I wasn't complimenting you, Mai told him. I can't believe how self-centered you are, said Gasha. Well, Pico added, it's certainly in character for you, at least, huh? Still, there was a certain trust behind Pico and Gasha's words. Dino couldn't hide his surprise. He never really expected them to trust in him. In fact, he anticipated needing a lot of time to make them see things his way, and he feared Mai wouldn't bother listening at all. So you're okay with this? Because I haven't even told you about my plan yet. But all that came back was encouragement. Just do it, man. If you mess it up, I'll kill you. I guess we'll just have to trust him, huh? Feels kind of like a bet, but... So Gasha, Pico, and Mai, in that order, volunteered their trust in Dino. With a bold smile, Dino turned to Beretta. Right, so first off, do something about this metal that's hardened up to my waist. Without a word, Beretta released him. Okay, Dino said, standing up. Sorry if I made you guys wait a while. He stretched out his arms and gave his friends a refreshed smile. Then he looked at everyone in order, his expression stiffening. Right. Time to get serious for a change. His eyes, always half open and sleepy, widened. This would be easy enough to do, if it was only him, at least. See, the reason we can't defy Feldway is because of the override circuit built into angelic ultimate skills. Everyone listened on, sober looks on their faces. That's why we're being forced to submit to a higher authority, but if we had the administrative rights to erase that, like Abila did, we could have gotten away, huh? Gasha cut in bitterly. Yeah, Pico agreed with a nod, that was pretty bold of her. Too bad we can't do that any longer. Mai was one thing, but Dino and his two friends did have those rights handy. It'd be a shame to lose a skill granted to them by Veldenava, although anything was better than having to bend to Feldway. It was possible for them to simply erase the ability, or it used to be, but sadly, that move was now prohibited. If Abila hadn't acted on her own like that, erasing would have been the move to make. They had to resent her for not consulting with them before going ahead with it. She was kind of in a hurry, it was true, but even so, there really needed to be more discussion. There wasn't much point complaining about that now, though, so Dino veered over to the main topic at hand. Hey, listen up one sec. What I'm trying to say is that if we can get rid of that override circuit, we can break out of this. But how? Pico asked. If we could do that, we wouldn't be in this mess, Gaasha noted. A way that doesn't involve having those administrative rights? Because I don't have those, said Mai. All three members of the audience had their own opinions about this. Well, actually, yes. Exactly that. The problem is how we'll time it. As he subsequently elaborated, Dino thought that he might be able to use his skill evolution to remove the override circuit. Only he was capable of doing that, but he thought he could maybe use the momentum from that to forcibly intervene into everyone else. That was the first bet. He had never tried anything like this, so they'd be going in without a net, and even if it worked, there was a good chance Feldway would notice and interrupt him before they could wrap it up. Sounds like a pretty slapdash plan, Mai ruefully said. It was a gamble, a big gamble, as far as she was concerned. But that didn't change her decision at all. She had decided to take the plunge, and there was no turning back now, and if that's how the most serious-minded person in the group reacted, Pico and Gaasha were ready to follow her lead. Do it before he finds out, said Pico. If you say you can't do it later on, I'll kill you, added Gaasha. They wanted to get started as soon as possible, seemingly assured that there was no way Dino would fail them. Right, he thought, nodding at them. But then, let me help you as well. Shuna was walking over to them, smiling. Dino, thrown by this, tried to figure out what she was up to. I will support you on this, Sir Dino. I will imitate your intervention and perform the same action on the other three. So do not worry. The assurance and the smile seriously perplexed Dino. She's serious, right? Can she even do a trick like that? If she could, it'd mean she was virtually godlike in power. The sort of skill evolution Dino was talking about was fairly close to impossible as it stood, but Shuna was going to decipher it, make it her own, and use it on the others at the same time? It just seemed so far beyond the realm of possibility. But Raimuru's crazy enough that he might have been able to, actually. I think, Shuna said, perhaps reading Dino's mind, that Sir Raimuru had seen all this coming in advance. He believed all along that you would join us. Yeah, echoed the voice of Ramirez, and I believe it, too. So listen, Dino, if you make this work, all is forgiven, okay? Just trust in Shuna and get yourself back to normal already. Okay. All Dino could do was nod back. He was intending to power his way through this, and if this improved his chances for success, he couldn't wish for a better offer. He had no reason at all to reject it. All right. I'm gonna do it, then. Yes, go right ahead. Shuna looked Dino in the eyes and nodded. It was kind of doubtful whether Rimuru had foreseen this moment or not, but Shuna didn't fear the situation at all. Deep within her soul, she still felt a palpable connection with Rimuru. Guiding deities, the ultimate skill she had just acquired, was proof of this. It was an amalgam of every other skill out there, the culmination of all the skills that Rimuru had collected and analyzed. It was, in fact, the heaven-sent child of Rimuru's own ultimate skill Shub-Niggurath, Lord of Abundance, and thus, there was no way it could fail. Dino activated his ability, invoking Belphegor to counteract Astarte. This temporarily disabled the override circuit, and at that moment, he set another skill upon it. Evolution. Could he pull the wool over Feldway's eyes? It was a gamble, but it paid off. The next moment, Belphegor and Astarte clashed with, then merged with each other. With that, he acquired the ultimate skill Astaroth, Lord of the Fallen, an incredibly powerful ability combining the creativity and destructive force of Veldenava's beloved Astarte with the absolute mind superiority provided by Belphegor. At one point in the past, Dino was the trusted servant of Veldenava the Star King Dragon. He always stood by his side, acting as the sword Veldenava fought with in battle. That was in the past, but even now, he enjoyed a reputation as the strongest swordsman that ever was. Over time, the world had settled down, conflict disappearing from the land. From that point, he was appointed the guardian of the planet by Veldenava, and his journey across the world began then. But then Veldenava passed away, as if waiting for the exact moment Dino was away to do so. Him and Lucia, his beloved wife. The creative forces of Astarte, Lord of High Heaven, could also be an incomparably powerful destructive force. Dino's fierce anger and hatred drove him to run wild across the land, destroying rich and powerful nations in the most cruel and pitiless manner, but it did not calm him down. He regained his reason once he had completed his revenge, but now nothing mattered to him at all. He even considered destroying the world itself, but he also understood that it would make everything truly meaningless. Dino was always half-hearted that way. He was too rational for his anger to last long, but he couldn't retain a positive view of the world, either. He needed a clear reason for whatever he did, and if he couldn't find one, he unconsciously set limits on what he could do. Astarte, his own power, had been sealed away because he felt responsible for all the destruction he did during his rage. Then Dino lost sight of the meaning of life. This was the point when he truly became one of the fallen. He was fortunate, at least, that his colleagues Pico and Gaasha stuck with him. If it had been just him, he might have disappeared without a trace. Several thousand years later, Dino continued to carry out his duties as the world's guardian, but he still hadn't found meaning to his life. In the process, he had discovered Milim, the orphan child of Veldenava and Lucia. He had no intention of becoming a servant to her, so he only observed her from discreet hiding spots, but she at least helped stave off his boredom. He was firmly entrenched in his lazy lifestyle by this point, but he was still having Pico and Gaasha gather information for him. Somewhere along the line, Dino had become a demon lord. Milim went berserk at one point, and Guy and Ramirez stopped her. Dino helped from the shadows back then, too, seeing such a dangerous person as too risky to leave unchecked. The next time she went out of control, she might very well destroy the entire world, and Dino felt it was his role to prevent that. In this way, Dino found a new meaning to his life. Even after achieving Demon Lord status, his daily life just dragged on, the same as it always had. The first sign of change came at the Walpurgis Council, where Rimuru joined their ranks. Clayman, a small creature who hardly seemed worthy of calling himself a demon lord, threw a punch at Milim. As sluggish as Dino was, it was such a shock that he snapped out of it in an instant, fearing what would happen if Milim went berserk. It turned out that Milim was acting, though, and when he looked into why, he found that the reason was Rimuru, the new guy. From then on, he took an interest in this demon lord. And when he came into contact with his true nature, whether by chance or fate, Dino once again found something to live for. Dot. Dot. Man, am I awesome or what? I actually removed the override circuit. Dino was preparing to brag all about it, but when he saw what was around him, he stopped, speechless. Shuna was even more awesome than he was. Imitation. Shuna had just copied Dino. Normally, this would mean that Dino was still the awesome one, since he came up with it first. But not here. Shuna had used analyze and assess to figure out what Dino was doing, extracted the key points from it, and manifested them herself in an instant. In addition, she was simultaneously reading and interpreting all the various and diverse powers of each of her targets. Dino was working strictly with powers he already had. This was several times more difficult. Fully understanding someone's skills in an instant. It was too hard to believe, but the ease with which she did it clearly showed how awesome Shuna really was. No way, he muttered to himself. He couldn't believe his eyes as Pico, Gasha, and May's powers were rewritten on the spot. Pico's ultimate skill Jibril, Lord of Rigor, was remade as Jibril, Lord of Severity, a better version that allowed for more freedom. Gasha's ultimate skill Haniel, Lord of Glory, was turned into Hamiel, Lord of Splendor, a version that couldn't be influenced by anyone else. Finally, Myfoki's ultimate enchantment world map evolved into the ultimate skill Terra Mater, Lord of Starry Skies, a skill that reflected May's own wishes much more closely. All of this had been done with Shuna's power alone, a feat that was impossible to believe. And the only person who could have ever made that possible. Yep. Just as I thought, that bastard Raimuru saw the whole thing coming. The image of the shameless Raimuru came to Dino's mind. He was the only person he knew who could pull off such impossible tasks and make it look so easy, and he probably did it again, just now. He wasn't there presumably, but it was like he was exercising his skills through the eyes and hands of his staff. And Shuna wasn't denying it, either. Well, yes, I'm sure, said Dino. As you surmised, this was not strictly my own power. She didn't think this was Raimuru at work, but it was certainly his powers, at least. Her imitation skill worked at the exact moment it needed to because someone was there making sure of it. If she was asked to do it again right now, she probably wouldn't be able to. It was likely only possible because she received the right data at the right time, from somewhere. Who sent it? She opted not to think about it. For the moment, she should have been happy that everyone was freed from Feldway's control. But just as Shuna was thinking that, things began to change. There was a rumbling across the labyrinth. That wasn't supposed to happen. Everyone immediately knew that some kind of anomaly had occurred. It was precisely at that moment when Zijin prepared to deliver the final blow to Vega. What is this? An astonished Shuna asked. The sensation was the same as back when floors of the labyrinth were being destroyed. Only a very few people, even among Tempest's executive ranks, could do such a thing. What's more, this tremor was even greater than the one before, when Vielgrind herself was wreaking havoc. No way. Don't tell me Vega really is trying to consume this place. Yeah, right. But this shaking. I doubt Vega could do anything like that. If he could, he would have first thing. It made sense to everyone on hand. So what happened? They looked at one another, confused over this unanticipated, unwelcome event. The control center was just as surprised, but the most shocked of all was Ramirez, the labyrinth's creator. Oh, come on. I had him quarantined and everything, but, who cares about that? We got way bigger trouble now. The floor where Vega was being held had been blown out entirely. That was certainly surprising, but what shocked Ramirez even more was the fact that another hostile presence had just infiltrated the labyrinth, one with an EP off the charts. The existential rating of the intruder has been measured. Its identity is confirmed to be Xeranus the Insect Lord, and his EP is 114 million. The operator fell silent. 114 million points. An epoch-destroying monster. Even Milim and Guy would have their work cut out for them, let alone Ramirez. Pretty tough. Benimaru wouldn't stand a chance, either. You could just say it's impossible, joked Ramirez, but there wasn't much energy in her voice. They were lucky to detect the intrusion, at least. If someone as strong as Xeranas caught them by surprise, they'd be helplessly defeated. Seeing Zijin get defeated in an instant was proof enough of that. But despite the hopelessness across the room, one person was still smiling. It was Diablo. He defeated Zijin, then? Interesting, shall I take this one on? He offered, brimming with confidence. You can't, Benimaru said. Yeah, added Ramirez, you're trying way too hard with that act. If Beretta was there, he would have been all for it, crowing about how nobody could stop Noir and all that, but he wasn't, so the nose had it. You never know until you try, though, responded Diablo, looking a little put off. Before the mood turned even more sour, Franny stepped in. Actually, I know that all of us aren't in the best of health right now, Benimaru included. Diablo seems to be the only person who can take him on. Why don't we leave this to him? She was speaking the truth. No one could argue against her. Gable was seriously injured, and after taking on Geld's own wounds, Ranga was seriously depleted of magical force. Gobta, Rigard, and the rest were out of the fight. Zijin and Apito were on assignment, as were Kumara and Geld. The only member left was Diablo. Cherries, the guardian of Ramirez, could be counted on as a fighting force as well, alongside Thrane's kin and the 4 Dragon Lords, but that was a last resort, and to begin with, none of them could possibly stand up to Xeranas. Zijin could always be relied upon, but, well. So, without further objection, it was decided that Diablo would deal with Xeranas. The labyrinth violently shook again. The source of the tremors was rapidly approaching the floor Dino and his crew were on. I have a real bad feeling about this. What a coincidence, Pico. I do too. Pico and Gasha sounded concerned, and it seemed like their fears would soon become reality. The labyrinth ceiling cracked as each floor was broken through with a force beyond imagination. This would normally be impossible, as the labyrinth interior used different dimensional layers for each floor, but that was not the case for this kind of common-sense-defying force. In fact, there were several Tempest residents who could tap into limitless power to do that. But this was a different phenomenon. It looked to Dino like the intruder was just ripping whole dimensions open with simple force alone. This is bad, isn't it? It sure is. I mean, can you even do stuff like this in real life? Ramirez's labyrinth was easy to escape from but difficult to break into. Magic sense stopped working well once you were more than a couple floors away, so it wasn't possible to do something like teleport to a given person's location. But this being, radiating a furious aura and not trying to hide it, was heading straight for the arena where Dino and his friends were. An insider might know who was where at a given point in time, but Dino couldn't guess who that insider could be. Still, the fact that this person was breaking down entire floors of the labyrinth narrowed down the candidate pool pretty quickly. Who is this? Dagrel is fighting Luminous right now. Could it be Feldway or Xeranas? Or someone else? He tried to figure it out, but he might not have to before much longer. It'd probably be quicker to just ask the guy when he showed up. Clearly, Dino was being targeted, although he really didn't want to admit it. Hey! Ramirez. What the hell's going on? Dino shouted. Well, a panicked-sounding Ramirez replied, some really bad stuff, pretty much. I'm busy, so I'll talk to you later. Whoa. Wait. Who's attacking? But there was no longer any need to ask, because a strange-looking figure had just leisurely descended from a rip in the ceiling. Xeranas? A mere glance indicated how strong he was. But even more dreadful was the person Xeranas held in his left hand, the strongest warrior in the labyrinth. Oh, no way, Zijin lost. Zijin, who had never imagined being defeated, was being dragged around unconscious. At this point, the group was split between calmness and panic. Shuna, Geld, and Beretta kept their cool. Apito didn't. Zijin. She was about to fly toward him, but Geld stopped her. Kumara and the rest were too dumbfounded to speak. They knew how strong Zijin was, and they couldn't accept that this was real at all. Now's no time to just be standing here. It was ultimately Shuna who ordered the retreat. They were wearing resurrection bracelets just in case, but she thought it was smarter to stay on guard and avoid becoming hostages. Beretta secured the escape route, ensuring everyone got out safely. For now, the plan was to flee into the control center. They'd rescue Zijin once they had a better idea of the enemy's strength. If they charged in without a plan, they knew they'd pay for it quickly. So they all went on the move, but "You're not going anywhere." Xirinus moved faster than anyone could track. He was after just one person. As he landed on the ground, he aimed at Apito, who Geld still holding back. NHHH? Geld stepped forward to protect her, but it was no use. He was casually knocked away by one of Xirinus's slender second pair of arms. No one could rival Geld in defense, but a casual slap from Xirinus was enough to knock him out. That was unbelievable enough, but after the reality of Zijin's defeat, people were a lot less surprised by it. Right now, job one was to get as far away as possible. "Don't worry," echoed the voice of Ramirez. "I changed the resurrection point." As if to prove it, everyone's resurrection bracelets were shining on their wrists. Even amid all this chaos, Ramirez was taking the proper measures. "We were enemies until a moment ago. Is it really okay for her to trust us that readily?" Dino felt that simply running away with everyone else wouldn't do much to earn everyone's trust. There was no defying Feldway, but if they acted too readily like they were all full-fledged buddies again, they might wind up facing some blowback. "Pico, Gasha, are you gonna join me?" "Of course." "Ah, I knew you'd say that." Dino's thoughts were easily readable by his two longtime friends. Pico and Gasha drew their weapons and stood alongside him. "I'm here, too," Mai said, bow and arrow at the ready as she stood behind them. Xirinus gave the group a quick glance. "Hare, you were part of Feldway's force, weren't you? So you betrayed him." "No, it was Feldway who betrayed us," Dino told him. "Exactly," said Pico. "Taking over our minds like that. Totally awful. So if you're gonna fight us, Xirinus, you better be ready," added Gasha. It was all a bunch of bravado, but the three of them didn't have much other choice at the moment. They sure didn't feel like they had any chance, although there was still the faint hope that he'd maybe back down for them. But naturally, Xirinus wasn't fooled. "Ha! Give me that woman, and I'll let you go." He was talking about Apito. Dino reasoned that Xirinus needed her because she was the same race as him. Zijin was still alive, too, come to think of it. It wasn't that Xirinus couldn't kill him, he wanted to bring him out of there. He was aware that killing him in the labyrinth would just revive him again. On the other hand, he could kill him all he wanted to outside of this place. He might be wanting to add them to his ranks, too, but either way, this wasn't good news. Whether he'll kill them or recruit them, it doesn't matter. If he brings them out of the labyrinth, we lose. Dino was right to think that. Xirinus didn't really care which of those two things happened. Zijin and Apito had already been incorporated into Sephiroth, Lord of Life, the ultimate skill possessed by Xirinus. Killing them would let him obtain their powers, and recruiting them would give them time for those powers to develop further. Either way, if anyone got in the way of him, he was ready to dispatch them at once. He had enough power to do that, for certain. So no one could dare to take him on. Not so fast, king of the insects. But there was one obstacle left in his way. Diablo. There was palpable delight on Dino's face. Diablo was the worst person to have as an enemy, but there was no one he'd rather have fighting on his side. No matter how much despair Xirinus had plunged them all into, there was still the assumption that Diablo would work something out. Diablo sized up Dino with his cold eyes. "Stop acting so strange, Dino, take everyone to a safe place at once." With that, he walked in front of Xirinus, And that was how the battle between the Dark Lord and Insect Lord began. Xeranas stood on the ground in front of Diablo. He tossed Zygon aside, as if he was in the way. He was a coward at heart, so he had already sniffed out the most dangerous people in the labyrinth. None of them were there at first, but the moment he saw Diablo up close, he felt a sudden chill, a sign of danger, the same as the one he felt when facing the demon Lord Milim. This opponent struck a small presence, but he still wasn't someone to take lightly. Simply realizing this meant Xeranas was smarter than a lot of his other opponents. Insect Lord Xeranas, it is time to test your abilities. You must think you're so smart, demon. The conversation immediately ended as Xeranas went on the move. Slipping through all air resistance, he went around to the back of Diablo, then released a rear roundhouse kick. It was aimed at the unprotected back of Diablo's head, but Diablo reacted like he saw it coming. He leaned forward, then launched a rear-facing kick of his own, blocking Xeranas' attempt. The Insect Lord was a measure larger than Diablo, and there was untold force behind that kick, but Diablo successfully countered it. The sheer power was even greater than the strike that broke Carrera's arms, but Diablo remained calm. The two of them kept their distance from each other, the exoskeleton covering Xeranas' entire body glowing in a rainbow of colors. My. Is that crimson steel? That's going to be hard to break. Diablo transformed his magical power to manifest his demon scissors, a set of 5 blades that also had a dazzling glow to them, the mark of a god-class weapon. Ha! Don't even dream you can do that. Xeranas circulated power across his whole body, as if he was breathing. The silvery cilia that flowed from his forehead down his back stood on end, appearing to shine as they reflected the light from the labyrinth. The 2 pairs of wings from his back and waist were spread wide and glowing red, as if he was taking a threatening posture. Uncrossing his 3 pairs of arms, he took his stance. The lower arms prepared to cast magic, while the more slender upper pair vibrated, taking on a blade-like quality. Parrying that with your bare hands was like asking to be cut to pieces. Finally, the middle arms were poised to absorb any attack Diablo tried on him. He had no weak points, he could deal with every situation perfectly. He also had no weak attacks, his moves could deal with any target, whether from long, medium, or close range. One's existential rating factors in certain values unrelated to combat. It can include powers that aren't normally used much, which means someone may perform under their EP some of the time. But in the case of Xeranas, nearly all his point total reflected what he could actually do in battle. If there was ever such a thing as the ultimate battle lifeform, Xeranas was it. But Diablo wasn't fazed. He might have had no chance to beat Xeranas, but he was enjoying every minute of this battle against a foe so overwhelmingly superior to him. It was common knowledge that one's magic force the size of their maximum instantaneous magic output was more important than simply retaining a large amount of magicules. Along those lines, Diablo was specially geared for magic force. If you were lacking in magicules, you could always replenish them from the surrounding air. That was why Diablo didn't let himself be fooled by numbers and other silly things. Pure strength was what he looked for. Humans were a readily available way for Diablo to stave off boredom. Most of them weren't entertaining at all, but some had souls that shone with a unique beauty. That woman, Shizu Aizawa, was one of them. She had the courage to challenge an opponent who was certain to win, an element that always attracted Diablo's attention. The way she struggled desperately against her fate, no matter how clumsy it made her look, was something he found beautiful. That's why Diablo, despite being such a good fighter, was also very particular about how he fought. He didn't just want to win, he strove to be the kind of dominant force who could win no matter the situation. The experience would come in handy for his fight against Xeranas. Most battles fought at this level either ended in an instant or dragged on for extended periods of time. Diablo was well aware of this, and he saw no need to hurry things along. If Zygon, a fighter Diablo knew was talented, had been defeated, there was no doubting the strength of Xeranas, then. Attempting to defeat this kind of opponent in a big rush would come back to bite him. There were almost no techniques effective against Xeranus. If there was any chance to win, it'd involve a direct hit with his most powerful move at the very moment he dropped his guard. Until then, all Diablo could do was endure, and yet he seemed to be enjoying this from the bottom of his heart. Dot. Dot. Can't you understand the difference in ability? If that's what you have to say, why don't you defeat me already? You can't, can you? And that proves you aren't as great as you think you are. He was in well over his head, but Diablo was fighting in top form. He was certainly winning the verbal battle, at least. Xeranus wasn't too amused by this, but that didn't mean he was slacking off. As cautious as he was, he'd never let the enemy's words mislead him. Diablo had to praise him on that point. If his enemy was more weak-minded, he would have defeated him long ago. Instead, Diablo found himself annoyed by Xeranus's extreme caution. The man never tried any big fancy moves. He just radiated vast amounts of energy, enough to make you think he could make Diablo disappear whenever he wanted, and yet he never broke out any energy discharge techniques. He had been sticking strictly to martial arts so far. There were explosions of compressed air all over the place, but that was the aftermath of his aura releases. He was overwhelming Diablo, using only his body as a weapon, but Diablo wasn't falling behind, either. He could be hit head-on with a knockout blow, but as long as he parried it, there was no problem. His mind was like a supercomputer as he skillfully led Xeranus around by the nose. Impertinent little. It wasn't abject panic, but there was a slight ripple of emotion arising within Xeranus. He felt irritated. Unlike with Milim, he was sure that he'd never lose to Diablo. That was why he had no intention of throwing in the towel. But this was also the first time he encountered a foe this tenacious and persistent, and it was proving to be extremely troublesome. There was no way this enemy could ever stand in the way of his dominance, and yet he was constantly doing just that. What's wrong? Tired already? Diablo nonchalantly taunted Xeranus. It only made him more irritated. In the back of his mind, he was thinking, how dare this puny little thing stand before me, Xeranus, the future god of all creation, and so forth. But Xeranus still wasn't the type to panic over this sort of thing. He wasn't going to break out his most killer skills against someone like Diablo. This wasn't Milim, after all. In a battle between two transcendent fighters, the key lay in how well one could exhaust an opponent. And as long as Xeranus kept fighting the way he was, there was no way he could lose. Diablo, fully in his element, was admiring Xeranus, who was currently immobile. He's more trouble than I thought. Even he could admit to how fearsome he was. He could only deal with Xeranus because he was still sticking to martial arts alone. That was good news for him, more or less, but it also meant Xeranus would never, ever be open and attackable. There was no way to turn the tables on him. So he tried to agitate him, chipping away at his composure, but Xeranus wasn't easily moved that way, either. He was merely demonstrating a little bit of irritation. The sheer nerve, the mental strength he showed, was tremendous. Diablo himself didn't like it when some wimp tried to verbally diss him in a fight, after all, and he had crushed more of those guys like a bug than he could count. But Xeranus showed no sign of deviating from the path of victory he mapped out for himself at the start. At this rate, Diablo's only choice was to shake things up a bit. But that's not a good move. It could be suicidal if I'm not careful. Maintaining the status quo, in other words, was his best option. Even if he couldn't defeat Xeranus, Benimaru was waiting in the wings. Zijin was likely to come back soon as well, and the rest of Tempest's best were healing up as well. The control room was recording every aspect of this fight, so they could refer to the tape for next time. That was certainly one way to picture things, but even then, Diablo saw a rocky road ahead. Xeranus's strength was simply abnormal. He was almost treading into divine territory. If they started staging total war, it might have been possible to beat him, but if they moved up to the surface to fight it out, it'd lead to staggering losses. They might not have had a choice, though. The labyrinth seemed to be collapsing in on them. If that happened, the scale of the damage would be immeasurable. Rimuru would be so disappointed when he came back, and I absolutely cannot allow that, Diablo thought as he kept on fighting. It was clear that Xeranos was targeting Zijin and Apito. If Diablo was defeated, their fates would be sealed, and Xeranos would become even stronger. So was protecting them his best bet? Diablo was regrettably unable to agree with that. Xeranos had broken through many layers worth of labyrinth in search of Zijin and Apito, which meant he had a super sense that let him pinpoint their location. Protecting them might wind up endangering everyone else around them. From that perspective, one might conclude that it was similarly dangerous to keep fighting in the labyrinth at all. But leaving the labyrinth would rob the fighters of Ramiriz's resurrection abilities, and it had become even harder to beat Xeranos then. Perhaps we'd make it out alive, but most of our people wouldn't. Over half of the 12 lordly guardians were incapable of resurrecting themselves. You had to be a full-fledged spiritual life form, or else once you died, it was all over. Either way, panicking was not an option. The best thing Diablo could do was to keep gathering information. He could seek out Xeranos's weak points, and at the decisive moment, he could go into an all-out attack. That was the simulation he was running in his mind over and over, provided that he could continue to fend off Xeranos's attacks without making a single mistake, an impossibility usually, but Diablo wasn't worried. He would never make a mistake, a belief he was absolutely firm on. Unfortunately, the inconvenient truth was that there are no such things as absolutes in this world. Xeranos sneered. "Hare. You're a petty creature who can resort to nothing but petty tricks. A perfect match for the lowly slime that you serve, no doubt." Now it was him taunting Diablo. There was no way to disturb Diablo's emotions, no matter what anyone told him. He might get a little angry, but he'd be able to easily shrug it off. This time, however, was different. Xeranos's words were taboo, plain and simple. At the very least, he should never have uttered them within Ramiriz's labyrinth. What? The light disappeared from Diablo's eyes. Those twin abysses of darkness peered into Xeranos. Without realizing it, Xeranos had touched upon a forbidden subject. Dino and everyone else watching Diablo's battle were stunned by how ferocious it was. He had ordered them to evacuate the area, but they ignored him. They didn't see any reason to heed his demands, and they wanted to watch the battle anyway. Now they regretted it, and feared that they lost their chance to escape. This was all going so quickly, any spectators needed hasten thought turned up to maximum to even recognize a battle was taking place. There were loud explosions everywhere, but that was just the aftermath. The real attacks involved simple hand-to-hand combat. Diablo was parrying Xeranos's blade with his demon scissors. Xeranos used his silver cilia to try to lop a limb off Diablo, who responded by elegantly working his magic to create dummy versions of himself. He attempted to counterattack whenever he saw an opening, but Xeranos's ironclad defense blocked him each time, so he'd quickly give it up and prepare for the next wave of attacks. It was a true model of fighting, as if Diablo had written the book on how to battle someone of a higher level. "Hey! Can you fight like that?" Dino couldn't help asking Pico, Gasha, and Mai. "No way. Stop asking stupid questions, dumbass. What kind of answer were you expecting, huh?" However, his 3 companions were less than cordial with him. What kind of answer was he expecting? Dino didn't know either, which troubled him. Mai, for that matter, wasn't able to perceive this battle whatsoever. These 2 men were appearing and disappearing at random, and there were occasional explosions, but that was all she could see. She just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible, because she certainly didn't have what it took to intervene. She wasn't alone, either. Apito, with all her speed, could perceive the battle just fine, but if she ever stepped in, she assumed she'd be blown to pieces in an instant. When a battle was going on, Diablo turned into this whole other person. Honestly, I was going to step in and look cool fighting, but even if I went all out, I'd still get my ass kicked. Yeah. You'd be lucky to survive for even a few minutes. You could probably last longer, Dino, but I sure couldn't. One strike from those guys could cut me in half. Mai, who couldn't even see the fight, refrained from offering an opinion. She realized that if things didn't work out like this, it would have been a suicidal fight for them all, and the thought made her shudder. Apito was sticking around, presumably worried for Zijin. Pico and Gasha were healing him, but they weren't particularly great at that, so he still wasn't awake yet. Mai was staying on guard, ready to run at any time, but she knew she was just kidding herself. If she was attacked before she had the time to realize it, she'd be dead before she could react. All she could count on was Ramirez's announcement about changing the resurrection point for them, and the only other thing any of them could do was pray for Diablo to win. Unlike all these onlookers, Shuna had quickly evacuated to the control center. Beretta, Geld, and Kumara were with her. Beretta was carrying Geld and Shuna, and Kumara provided support. There was nothing any of them could do in this battle. Getting killed and revived over and over again would only increase the burden on Ramirez. Shuna wasn't even a combat-oriented skill user in the first place. Having other people feel obliged to protect her would just make her a hindrance, so she wisely opted to stay out of the way. Geld, of course, was downed with a single blow, and Shuna and Kumara couldn't fight any better than him. "Welcome back," came the greeting from Ramirez. "Thank you," Shuna said with a light bow. Only then did she begin treating Geld. Looking at the large screen, she was struck dumb by the ferocity of the battle unfolding. "If it weren't for Sir Diablo, we all would have been wiped out, wouldn't we?" "Looks like it." "I can't deny that," Ramirez and Benimaru agreed. Beretta was watching the battle, too, similarly incredulous. "Just what I'd expect from Sir Diablo," he muttered. He sounded wowed by him, but not even he would have lasted more than a few seconds against that barrage. "Honestly, I can't say I understand very much of what's happening," remarked Gable. "It's an all-out battle, but neither of them is making any large-scale moves," Cherries explained. "They're both taking pains to keep from consuming too much of their strength, even when one side gets exposed a little. It looks pretty humdrum at first glance, but it's clear to me just how skilled they both are. Boy, forget about this. I could use all the intuition I've got and I'd still never win. Do not fret about it, Gobta. I would be helpless as well." That wasn't the most encouraging of responses from Ranga, but Gobta didn't mind. Or rather, it was pointless worrying about it, because it wasn't like they had any chance of winning. The Gobta/Ranga duo was having trouble keeping up with Diablo and Xeranus's moves. Ranga had keen smell to provide him some help, but if this was how fast they were moving, it was simply impossible to track them. The battle was already at a level where it'd be impossible for the two of them to win. Stepping in to provide support would be a good way to get killed. Kumara was also the same way. If Ranga was helpless to do anything, so was she. She couldn't even understand what was happening, so she would have been killed out there before she knew what was up. This battle was just in a world so far removed from their own. "I fear that we left Apito behind," she said. "Don't worry about it," Benimaru told her. "You did the right thing. Xeranus is targeting her and Zijin, not us." "Yeah, exactly," said Ramirez. "And I don't feel too great about it, but I set Apito and Zijin's resurrection point to the labyrinth prison. Better that than to have them drag us down with them, you know." "Sure, but I guess those resurrection bracelets won't come in so handy now." Benimaru had reached the same conclusion as Dino. If Xeranus wanted to kill Apito and Zijin, he'd have to do it outside of the labyrinth, so there wasn't much point setting up a special resurrection point for them. This was just a precautionary measure, in case the two of them sacrificed themselves as a lure or something. It may have sounded cold, but this was the painful decision Ramirez and her cohorts had to make. She and Benimaru weren't Rimuru or anything, they couldn't pull a miracle out of their pockets to save everyone in the nick of time. All they could do was believe in Diablo's ultimate victory. But just then, "Hare, you're a petty creature who can resort to nothing but petty tricks. A perfect match for the lowly slime that you serve, no doubt." Xeranus's comment reached the control center. He had interrupted the battle on purpose so he could provoke Diablo a little. Ah! Someone groaned to themselves when they heard it, probably Ramirez or Thraney. This was forbidden territory. It made Benimaru slam his fist down on his desk, breaking it. That's kind of expensive, complained Ramirez, although she had the self-defense instincts to do it in a low whisper. The control center was now filled with murderous fury. But nobody in there had any part to play in this. Someone else on the scene was just as furious as them, if not more so. The warrior awakened. The rage, the fury that burned hot enough to incinerate every cell of his body, had brought Zijin back from the brink of death. Was this a mere coincidence, or was this inevitable? Those wholly unnecessary words had just thrown fate off its plotted course. "Ha! Dino, then? Looks like I owe you one," Zijin said, and he calmly stood up. "Whoa, don't try anything reckless. Yeah, you're not fully healed yet." Gasha and Pikiko attempted to stop him, but Zijin paid them no mind. His gaze was fixed on Xeranus the Insect Lord as he set out to complete his mission. "You see how Diablo's faring against him," ventured Dino. "It's gotta be tough for you, too, right?" Zijin just smiled a little. "Watch a pito for me," he said, pushing Dino aside as he walked forward. "Can you beat him, Zijin?" "Of course." The unwavering reply made Dino chuckle. He didn't just think it'd be a little tough, he seriously believed that he had no chance. But now Zijin was declaring victory like that was the most natural thing to do. The confidence was laughable, doing a lot to lighten his mood, and so Dino impulsively handed over the large sword he was holding. It was Fang Smasher, the god-class broadsword he was fond of. "Here. Go beat his ass and make my life easier for me. You haven't even done anything yet." Dino thought he heard a voice from somewhere far away say that, but he just ignored it. "Very well," Zijin said, accepting the sword. Then, with a nod, he took it with one hand and placed it on his back. At that moment, Fang Smasher sparkled in glowing light, and when it died down, a pair of shining wings appeared on Zijin's back. This was the reborn form of Fang Smasher after fusing itself with Zijin, and it marked the birth of Wing Smasher, a new power of his. "Fang Smasher wasted no time accepting you, huh?" Dino mused. "It never even accepted me as its master." Zijin continued to the battlefield, paying Dino no mind. Zijin quietly stood next to Diablo. "Let me tag in." It was right when the enraged Diablo was trying to land an attack on Xeranus, but his calm, unaffected voice made Diablo regain his composure. "You do realize he has insulted Sir Rimuru, right? We cannot allow this to stand." "Of course not. I will dispatch him, I promise." Zijin never made promises he couldn't keep. Diablo, fully aware of that, briskly nodded. "All right, then. You have the floor." "Thank you." So Zijin switched places with Diablo. This was now the father and son battle of the century. Xeranus somberly took his position. He had already defeated Zijin once, so his mood wasn't exactly tense. Things could get thorny if Diablo provided him assistance, but either way, he was confident victory would be his. And now that he knew Zijin was intent on fighting solo, he was internally laughing at him, calling him a fool. Killing him inside the labyrinth, where he'd just be resurrected again, would be meaningless. But what if he consumed him with Devastator virus while still alive? He'd likely be resurrected if his soul fled on him, but could he put a cap on Zijin's power that way? Ramirez and the others had feared such an approach. They hadn't tested out whether people eaten alive in the labyrinth would be resurrected, so it was still an unknown, and they didn't really want to attempt it. The best thing was to avoid such a situation in the first place. But that was exactly what Xeranus was thinking of. Zijin was his son, and he wanted to take him out of the labyrinth and have him rejoin his family lineage if he could. He wanted to have him swear loyalty to him once more, then present him as the new god of creation, but if he was hostile, that was another story. He wasn't that intent on keeping Zijin alive, there was always a Pito, too. It will be quite a struggle to create new members of my clan, but if I use that girl Apito as the mother, it should produce me a very stout set of sons. Then Xeranos would pit those sons against each other and take in their power. He didn't hesitate to take every measure possible to strengthen himself. My son, I will give you a single chance. Swear your loyalty to me and come work for me. Do it, and I will promise you the position of the next god of creation. I refuse. I already have my god. The proposal that Xeranos offered with all the mercy he could muster was promptly turned down. Then die. He had refrained from any large-scale attacks against Diablo, lest he leave himself wide open. But if this was only Zijin he was fighting. Devastator virus. With no apparent further need for caution, Xeranos launched the attack. He began by releasing what looked like a punch, but then his arm turned into a black mist that clung hard to Zijin. It was a dark, ravenous monster that devoured everything in its way, and Zijin had no way to fight back as it sucked his bones dry, or it should have anyway. Instead, the aura that covered Zijin's whole body completely obliterated Devastator virus the moment it came into contact with the mist. What? Xeranos had held back his force during the fight against Diablo, but he had just made a terrible mistake. Rather than worry about that, though, he wondered what exactly Zijin just did to him. Zijin's whole body was shining in a dazzling array of colors, the trademark crimson steel sheen that Xeranos also had. His presence grew larger and larger, a presence so powerful that not even Xeranos could ignore it. Well done, Zijin. I see you've opened the door as well, said Diablo. Of course. Our God has always showered his love upon his lowly servants. Exactly so. However, don't worry, Diablo. I am not foolish enough to let myself be drowned by this power. With that, Zijin took a step forward. The sheer pressure caused the ground to shake. The labyrinth rumbled. Seriously, what's with that? Asked Pico, who was watching the fight alongside Dino. If she didn't know, there was no way Dino did. Don't ask me. Here, Diablo, you explain it instead. He turned to Diablo, who had retreated back to them, but the request was greeted with a cold brush off. Foolish idiot. Just shut up and watch. Okay. Diablo had no interest in dealing with him. Dino had no choice but to back down. Llama. How embarrassing can you get? Yeesh. Dino's friends were no more supportive. Friendship can be so fleeting, can't it? Thought the lonely Dino, although he wasn't sure whether he had any friendship from them in the first place. The giant screen depicted the heroic figure of Zijin, more than holding his own against Xeranos. What's up with all this, huh? Said Ramirez. The statistics said that this shouldn't even be possible. After taking up Fang Smasher, Zijin's existence points had swelled up to just under 8 million. Just as Dino said, the blade had fully recognized its new master, activating all this power for him. Even so, it paled in comparison to Xeranos. But Zijin wasn't backing down one bit. Or rather, he was starting to slowly overwhelm him, bit by bit. Oh. So Zijin has that power, too. You know what this is, Benimaru? Asked Ramirez. Then tell us. But Benimaru was hesitant. It was a difficult power to explain. This is probably the same power that Tsuraimaru lent me. That was about all that he could say about it, too. In truth, Benimaru had at least a vague awareness of another presence within Raimaru, one that went by the name of Seal. Something had guided him to this new power, and thanks to that, the prominence acceleration he threw at Milim had all that incredible force behind it. As a result of that, though, he was now terribly battered and bruised. The price of using Void Collapse, a skill not even Raimaru could fully handle, was greater than he thought. It caused him damage that couldn't be healed with potions or magic, and he was out of battle for the time being. So Raimaru is one thing, but that power is just so dangerous for us. Letting that power dwell within himself. Zijin's being way too reckless. Even if you tapped into it for just a moment like Benimaru did, the repercussions were gigantic. Use it for any extended amount of time, and the price you'd pay would be dear indeed. Thinking about it that way, Zijin should have stopped using it immediately. But if he stopped, that wouldn't be enough to beat Xeranos. So Benimaru remained silent, believing in Zijin's victory. Xeranos was sorely shaken. Zijin, his own son, had shown him some very unexpected power. It was well past what Szeth could do, reaching a level that not even Xeranos could afford to ignore. The chill he felt facing off against Diablo had now come back to haunt him anew. That child's exceeded my expectations. No. Wait. This much still isn't a threat to me yet. Xeranos was cautious. It wasn't easy to deceive him, and he never made the mistake of losing after overestimating his enemy. He suspected there was some kind of trick behind this abnormal new power of Zijin's. There was no other way to explain it. And if he wanted to keep this level of enhancement going for a long time, the burden on him had to be beyond any measure. Thus, all Xeranos had to do was fight without depleting his energy, just like he did against Diablo. Once he did that, he'd be assured victory in a reasonably short period, and then he could take his time more fully investigating the secret of Zijin's newfound force. With that in mind, Xeranos remained calm, his attacks falling into a monotonous pattern. Zijin, too, dealt with them without breaking a sweat, and this back and forth continued for a while afterward. Neither side let their guard down, and neither was unleashing any particularly major attacks. The battle devolved into a mechanical process, a constant repetition that threatened to last forever. Certainly, Xeranos had his regrets. He had tried to consume Zijin without warning via Devastator virus, but now that seemed like an error in judgment. He really should have softened Zijin up a bit before breaking that out for the surefire kill. It was with a new determination not to make similar mistakes that Xeranos attempted to corner Zijin. But as his silver cilia flowed and he closed in to cut his foe to pieces, Zijin's new wing smasher prevented any strike from hitting home. His cilia even brushed against it, but they weren't weak enough to be shattered by it, instead just repelling it away. Even so, it meant that Zijin wouldn't allow Xeranos to attack him. For a single moment, there was a look of astonishment on Xeranos' face. Zijin, who wasn't about to miss this opening, released his fist to keep up the attack. Xeranos, of course, avoided taking it directly. It lightly grazed him, but that wouldn't be nearly enough to scratch his crimson steel exoskeleton. "Bold of you," said Xeranos. "Ha! Trying to defeat me with these ridiculous techniques. All you're doing is shortening your own lifespan." "What did you?" Before he could finish the question, Xeranos jumped back, feeling a sharp pain on his side. Veldora-style death stance, fist of the hollow sky. That was Zijin's reply, explaining to Xeranos exactly what he had done. This killer move compressed energy to the very limit within his fist, creating a single blow with deadly force inside. Even if his foe evaded it, the ideal was for it to kill even with a glancing blow, or so Zijin was taught. A technique like that was an impossible fantasy, of course, but with control dimensions, not to mention the other skills in Zijin's possession, it suddenly was not a pipe dream at all. The simple contact from Zijin's body to Xeranos' allowed him to transmit that energy over to him, and with the destructive energy of void collapse stored in his striking fist, he had struck home even as Xeranos thought he had avoided the attack. The energy spread through Xeranos' body like a wave. The crimson steel exoskeleton offered no protection from the destructive force, accompanied by terrifying pain that raged from the side of the body he had been hit from. Xeranos howled, eyes turning red with rage. This was nothing short of an insult. He had been outwitted by his own son, someone he once thought of as truly insignificant. It was an unbelievable reality to face, and it consumed Xeranos with a rage that he didn't have any outlet for. Getting emotional on the battlefield, he matter-of-factly stated to himself, "I must be more immature than I thought." It served as a declaration that things had just changed in this battle. And from that point, Zijin's fierce counterattack began. Clearly, Zijin was enjoying far more power than before. His entire body was shining a rainbow of colors, indicating that nearly the entire exoskeleton covering his body had evolved into crimson steel. The power within his fists was dominating, well beyond anything demonstrated before. They tore through the sky, torching the earth, as his speed continued to ratchet up to levels beyond even what a Pito's divine velocity could reach. Xeranus's ability to deal with this was in itself amazing, but Zijin's onslaught was simply beyond comparison. There was a good reason for it, too. He was circulating the energy from void collapse within his body, like blood. This power coursing in his veins was so dangerous, a single mistake in controlling it could very well destroy the whole world. The sheer force it conjured was terror in itself. Xeranus's reaction speed just couldn't keep up. Little by little, fist after fist, kick after kick, it all began to start hitting him. Then, in an instant, the balance was utterly broken. Zijin threw a punch. Zijin kicked. Zijin broke his opponent. Zijin stabbed him. Zijin threw him. Zijin slammed him. No counterattack was allowed. It was sheer, one-sided violence. Zijin had become a lord of destruction, wielding overwhelming power. Xeranus's own power was the real thing. As Insect Lord, he had reigned for a near eternity, and yet he was no match for Zijin. No. He just couldn't understand. His consciousness was in a state of confusion, unable to grasp what was happening to him. Then Zijin stopped. HRIKH? Xeranus crouched down, coughing up blood. Zijin coldly looked down on him. He wasn't naive enough to hesitate finishing him off simply because he was his father. He had fled to this key world, protecting a Pito along the way, because Xeranus treated him and his kind like disposable pawns. He never had any intention of exacting revenge upon him, but now that things had come to this, it was simply fate at work. Hurting Xeranus this much still wasn't going to prove fatal. With enough time, he'd be able to revive himself. Zijin knew this, so he tried to release all his power in order to seal the deal for good. His aim now, to release Dimension Storm, a power that could turn all that exists into nothing at all. Xeranus was powerless to stop it. Wait. Xeranus uttered the word as if it took a Herculean effort. And perhaps it did. His entire exoskeleton was shattered and torn, his limbs ripped into shreds. It wasn't enough to move Zijin. Begging for your life is pointless. No. My son, you have beaten me. I will admit it, and I will grant you this. He wanted to entrust him with Sephiroth, Lord of Life, which was, in a way, Xeranus's everything. The reverse was also possible, since he could make the powers of his followers his own, but that was limited strictly to the moment of his own death or destruction. For Xeranus, this moment, the instant he had admitted defeat, was when he was able to transfer his royal authority to another. It was like the crowning of a new god of creation. Ridiculous. I have dedicated my life to the god Suraimuru. I have no intention of taking the throne. Your ambitions are doomed to be crushed right here, right now. Zijin sounded completely indifferent about it. But Xeranus happily smiled back at him. It is fine. You may live as you like, my son. I am satisfied with that. I was never able to surpass my father, as I hoped for all my life, but if my son now surpasses me, my wish has been granted. Such were the last words of the Insect Lord Xeranus. He had been using the power of his ultimate skill to maintain his existence, and now, by cutting the curse with his own two hands, he had ended the generational thrall this lifelong wish had put upon him. So foolish. Rest in peace, father. Dying may not mean that all sins are forgiven, but nevertheless, Zijin forgave Xeranus. Pito, standing next to him, offered a silent prayer, and in this way, the karmic chain of events between father and son was finally broken. Everyone in the control center was speechless. Even Geld, who had just woken up, was stunned. Gable, meanwhile, had his mouth hanging wide open. Gopta had been cheering on Zijin, carefree as always, but about halfway through, all he could say was "Oh, man, this is crazy," while Ranga curled up into a ball next to him, tail tucked between his legs. That's how shocking a sight it was. After all, Xeranus the Insect Lord, the most terrifying incarnation of despair in the world. Zejan's kind of scaring me. Benimaru briskly nodded at Ramirez's whispered evaluation. What is he anyway? I know he had to have used that power. So how is he so calm and collected now? He was genuinely flabbergasted. There was no way that he'd be able to withstand so much power flowing within him, or so he thought. Everyone knew that Zejan was an outstanding fighter, but the battle that just ended was so beyond reality that power alone couldn't explain it. Actually defeating the Insect Lord was nothing short of a miracle, but it was such an overwhelmingly one-sided victory that it now felt like this had been fated for them all along. Could you beat him, Benimaru? Do you really need to ask that? He mumbled back to Ramirez. As the real commander around here, picked by Rimuru to handle Tempest's military affairs, and not a ceremonial one like Ramirez, he didn't want to so readily admit to his inferiority, but I don't think I could beat Zejan right now, at the very least. He had to admit the truth, though. The operator who had been reporting existential ratings, by the way, was so shocked that she couldn't speak, instead flapping her mouth open and shut. But everyone else was too preoccupied to notice. Name, Zejan, EP, 68,889,143. Race, Microgod, highest level Chaos Elemental Spirit Insect. Protection, Rimuru's Protection. Title, Mist Lord. Magic, Water Soul Magic. Abilities, Ultimate Skill Mephisto, Lord of Illusion, Hasten Thought, Universal Detect, Lord's Ambition, Dominate Water, and Lightning, Dominate Dimensions, Multidimensional Barrier, All of Creation, Spiritual Domination, Fantastical World, Dominate Life, Sephiroth. Tolerances, Cancel Melee Attack, Cancel Ailments, Cancel Spiritual Attack, Cancel Natural Elements, Resist Chaos Attack. Dino's group was just as stunned by the result. Oh. Why are you pinching my cheek? Oh. I was just wondering if this was a dream. Yeah. I thought it was a nightmare, too, but I guess it's real after all. No. Listen to me. This seriously hurts, you know. Pico was pinching Dino's cheek to figure out whether this was a dream or not. Only Dino was complaining about it. Can you stop playing around, asked Mai, and explain what just happened? She could tell that something amazing had occurred, but she had no idea exactly what. Seeing Xeranus the Insect Lord lying in a heap on the ground was simply beyond belief. How could something like this ever happen? Yes, Zejan was clearly a fearsome fighter, but she thought there was this unbridgeable gap between them. Well, Dino didn't really understand, either. Zejan had suddenly gained a massive amount of power, and he couldn't think of any reason why. Was it just the weapon? No way. It had to have been something he did himself. If it couldn't be explained, pin it on Rimuru. It was enough of an explanation for nearly anything. And if that's how you thought about things, well, it simply showed how crazy that slime was. That much was obvious from the look of ecstasy on Diablo's face. Ah, so Rimuru is just as wonderful as I thought. I saw this coming from the moment I met Zejan. All of this was meaningless to Dino. He wasn't sure if he should ask him to say that again or just stop him from talking. Once Diablo went into all-hail Rimuru mode, there was just no end to it. But he seemed to know something, at least, and that made Dino curious. Could you explain it to me, too? He decided to ask. But Diablo just gave him a cold look. Huh? Stop being stupid. Why should I be obliged to share this excitement with you? Dino was left speechless. But the true reason behind Diablo's denial was to prevent the secret behind that power from leaking out. After all, this was the energy of Rimuru's void collapse at work. Only those connected to Rimuru via Soul Corridor who had opened the door had the right to borrow that power, but it was a catastrophic force, the kind that could destroy you after even the slightest mistake. With Rimuru absent at the moment, casually drawing from this power would be suicide. When Zijin began circulating that void collapse power around his body, Diablo began to wonder if he had lost his mind. But at the same time, he had a question: why was Zijin safe? Doing something like this should have destroyed him in an instant. Thinking about this, Diablo came up with one possible answer: the fact that a certain percentage of Zijin's body was made up of Raimuru's cells. Diablo wondered if Raimuru had given some of his own cells to Zijin because he anticipated a situation like this. If it was true, then everything else made sense. Thus, all that remained was the simple task of praising Raimuru. Of course, Raimuru hadn't foreseen any of this. He had saved Zijin just now without intending to. And for that matter, Raimuru's cells were used within Apito's body, too. This was a pretty lazy habit of Diablo's, making convenient assumptions about things and trying to reconcile them with the truth. Whenever Raimuru was involved in something, it always clouded Diablo's good sense. But he was still partially correct, and being not completely off the mark was one reason why Diablo could so effectively delude himself like this. In reality, the reason Zijin was safe was because the all-purpose cells within him, also known as Raimuru cells, or slime cells, had changed in response to the energy of void collapse. Just like Diablo, Zijin was giving far too much credit to Raimuru. He was convinced that this body Raimuru gave him would hold out against whatever he tried to do. But there was no basis for that. The only reason Zijin was okay was because he got lucky. Still, all that really matters are results, and once Diablo clammed up about it, the entire matter was buried in the dark. Dino, aware of none of this, was shocked by the rejection. He was ready for more irritating Raimuru worship, but instead he was brushed right off. Wow, mean. Well, you know how Diablo is. You're lucky he didn't punch you, huh? Right? Ha ha ha. Dino was looking to his friends for comfort but failed miserably at receiving any. Seeing poor Dino like that made me let out a big sigh. A relaxed atmosphere began to settle across the labyrinth. Now that the insect lord Xeranus had been overcome, everyone felt a lot safer. But the crisis wasn't over yet. There was still a survivor in the labyrinth, the personification of evil, in fact. You bastard. All of you, looking down on me. Treating me like a piece of crap. Goddamn you all. Vega, who looked well on his way to the grave, was stuck to the ceiling of the labyrinth, cursing anything and everything in the world, damning everyone who humiliated him like this. Despite it all, he still had a streak of good luck. Just when Zijin was about to kill him, Xeranus intervened to save his hide. So he was up on the ceiling now, holding back as he waited for his body to heal. Secretly, he had been tapping into the powers of his ultimate skill Azdahak, Lord of Dark Dragons, spreading his roots across the labyrinth and absorbing its power at will. The floor he was located in had been isolated by Ramirez, but Xeranus's appearance had opened up a connection to the lower floors, and by making his exit through there, Vega had now latched onto the labyrinth itself. This anomaly should have been noticed immediately, but once again, Vega was unconsciously lucky. All surveillance within the labyrinth had been focused on dealing with the threat of Xeranus, which made other areas less guarded. That wasn't Ramirez's fault. Xeranus was a major threat, after all. But as a result, Vega had managed to narrowly escape death, something he had done multiple times as of late. And right now, there was a better-than-ever meal lying at his feet. It was the corpse of the insect lord, who had been defeated by Zijin. And what's more, no one had even noticed that Vega was alive, much less present here. With the magicules in the area in major disarray, magic sense alone wouldn't be enough to pick up on him. Zijin and Apito had left the area, leaving their tasty meal in the center. Was it a trap? An unusually cautious thought entered Vega's mind, but he chose to ignore it. As long as he got that power, the overwhelming power of Xeranus, not even Zijin would be any kind of match for him. After all, Zijin looked downright exhausted. There was no liveliness to him, the fallout after exerting so much force against Xeranus, no doubt. This was no time for indecision. At this very moment, Vega had the biggest opportunity of his life. All right, Draco beasts, start kicking ass. With that shout, Vega created 4 Draco beasts, the most he could produce at once, and ordered them to rampage around as they pleased. Dino and his cohorts were there, but from Vega's point of view, they were essentially traitors to the cause. They didn't even try to attack the weakened Zijin. In fact, they seemed to be on friendly terms with one another. Well, I'm gonna eat all of you, too, okay? Don't hate me for it. So Vega watched the situation unfold, thinking only about what was convenient for himself. Then he was blessed by the biggest stroke of luck of the day. Everything moved in exactly the most helpful way for him. One of the beasts foolishly headed straight for Diablo and was promptly annihilated. One headed off somewhere and left the labyrinth floor entirely. The other 2 began their rampage on this floor. It was chaos, and Vega wasn't going to miss his window. Without thinking about any of the consequences, he lunged straight at Xeranus. Then, Infinite Eater. He successfully devoured Xeranus's corpse. Malice began to bare its fangs. Chapter 4. The Far Reaches of Delusion. Diablo only realized that Vega was there after things had already taken a sudden turn for the worse. All right, Draco beasts, start kicking ass. Vega had kicked off his attack with that shout. Diablo instantly reacted, of course, in battle position and ready to take on Vega. The same was true for Zijin. He was able to fight, no matter how much damage he took. However, Zijin hadn't yet made the skill he had received from Xeranus his own. He was still in the process of integrating it into his body. Just as Vega anticipated, he wasn't in his best form. In fact, he was in such bad shape that he was liable to pass out at any moment. The backlash from Void Collapse was so intense, it was a mystery how he still stood up at all. The fact that he kept this hidden from everyone showed just how amazing Zijin was. Dino's group reacted a beat later, but 2 Draco beasts made for a pretty hard struggle. It didn't look like they'd have time to handle Vega at all. In fact, they had completely let their guards down, or really, they didn't think they'd be targeted, since Vega was supposed to be on their side. That was what people called carelessness. Sorry, Dino said with a smile, but I can't fight. I gave my weapon to Zijin. That excuse, of course, wasn't going to work. Don't give me that, you idiot. Get serious already. Then I'll forgive you. Vasha and the others were merciless with him. Diablo, swiftly realizing that those fools could be left to themselves, faced up to his main target. I'll take this one, Zijin, he sneered. It wasn't a proposal so much as a final decision, and Zijin had no reason to reject it. He obediently nodded and backed away, Apito supporting him. Vega, his eyes red, landed in front of Diablo. He'd shouted loudly in order to attract the group's attention, and while Diablo was distracted, he managed to consume Xeranus's corpse. Gah ha ha ha. Wow. Amazing. This guy's got some real power. He couldn't have sounded more delighted. A little earlier, Zijin nearly killed him, but Xeranus's intervention saved his life. He could have just bowed out then and there, but instead he waited for his chance, and this was the time. Xeranus's power overwhelmed Zijin at one point, and now it belonged to Vega. It was so beyond anything else, Vega felt like his power had increased several times over in the blink of an eye. You're Diablo, right? I'll let you live if you swear to become my servant. Vega saw Zijin was a dangerous opponent, one he needed to watch out for. Now that he was out of the picture, it was the perfect time to kill him and take away his power as well. He wasn't interested in Diablo interfering with that, but after seeing Diablo instantly kill that Draco beast, he realized that this was a pretty capable opponent, after all. Still, Vega had also seen the difficulty Diablo had fighting Xeranus, so he was still fully confident of his chances. Once he consumed Zijin as well, victory was guaranteed. But there was no way that was going to work. What? Diablo looked like he failed to understand what he had just been told. You don't happen to be looking down on me, do you? He found it hard to believe. being seen as inferior by a minion as wimpy as Vega was more than wounding his pride. It was an outrage, an unforgivable one. Speaking ill of Rimuru was a taboo around Diablo, but he also had serious issues with anyone acting like they were better than him. Without realizing it, Vega had already stepped on a landmine. And then, "Yeah, I sure am. But it ain't a bad offer, right? I mean, Feldway's probably killed that smug slime bastard, so, oof." At that moment, Vega's fate was decided. Before he could even understand what had happened, he was knocked down. It was more surprising than painful. RRGH. What the hell did you do to me? What did I do? What kind of nonsense are you talking about? The same bottomless darkness that had descended upon Xeranus a moment earlier, the power of the void, straight from the abyss, was about to envelop Vega next. It was just like how Zijin was able to open the door at will. If anything, Diablo was better at it than him. There was no longer any measuring him by numbers. HNGH? Vega felt an instinctive sort of fear. Finally, he recognized that Diablo was a dangerous man to cross. He had just been punched in the cheek, and the pain was virtually unbearable. Sensing pain was something he stopped having to do long ago, but something about this was directly affecting his soul instead. "Are you ready for this?" Wait. He attempted to bargain with him at this point, no matter how bad it made him look, but it was already too late. There was no other way left for this to go. "No, I am not going to wait." Diablo's reply confused Vega. Am I going to die? Me? No. No, I could never." In his terror, Vega let loose with all his abilities. It didn't matter if he couldn't beat Diablo. He had to find a way to escape, and he released all of them at once, hoping against hope that something would stick, and thanks to that, something very unforeseen happened. Vega's labyrinth integration began to accelerate. His ability allowed him to run his own routes through the earth in order to gain nourishment. As evidenced by his labyrinth corrosion work, it didn't stop at corpses alone, it could gain nutrients from just about anything. He had been unable to leverage his own immortality, thanks to Ramirez isolating him from the rest of the labyrinth, but no longer. The labyrinth was now providing an inexhaustible supply of energy, and he had also just taken in Xeranus, the greatest meal of all. Now he felt more full of power than ever before. But somehow, it wasn't working on Diablo. Realizing that a half-hearted effort wouldn't be enough, he went beyond all his limits, taking in more and more power from the labyrinth. It blew him up until he was gigantic in size, but it still didn't satisfy him. "No. I need more. This ain't gonna be enough to fight this monster with. I can't just take in the labyrinth, I gotta eat everyone hiding in the lower levels." His desires grew as much as his body did. It was akin to suicide. Uncontrollable power ultimately destroyed everything, but Vega was obsessed with this need for more power, like he was trying to run from his own fears. This labyrinth was teeming with monsters, not just Zijin, who had overwhelmed Vega, but also this demon Diablo, just too dangerous to take on. Diablo's demon scissors had just cut one of his Draco beasts completely to pieces. It had disappeared completely instead of regenerating on the spot. Vega saw it with his own eyes, so there was no doubting it. The current Draco beasts were stronger than back when he fought Hinata. That was why there were only 4 of them, creating a horde of weaker ones seemed pointless. So Vega had been learning lessons from the past, but it didn't mean anything against Diablo. 2 of the other Draco beasts were targeting Zijin, but they couldn't be counted on much, either. If Zijin was enough of a monster to defeat the Insect Lord, those guys weren't likely to take him down, either, even if Zijin was in a weakened state. This was why Vega was so driven to try whatever he could. He wanted to take in more power, more and more, so he could surpass both Diablo and Zijin. This was why he accelerated his labyrinth corrosion, assimilating it into himself so he could take it over. But there was no way he could have emerged unscathed from this. In no time at all, Vega's vision grew hazy. He was now fully out of control, turned into a beast whose attention was devoted solely to the large masses of energy he needed. In essence, he had lost his mind. "I'll eat you. All of you. I'll eat you all and prove that I'm the strongest." He was spraying spittle as he shouted, his expression tinged with madness. He was trying to be intimidating, but intimidation was just the flip side of abject terror. Seeing it made Diablo let out a sigh. Well, great. If he's expanded his strength this much, he is certainly a threat, no doubt, but it just seemed so boring to him. Viga's abilities were a pain to deal with. He could see why Testarossa let him go. Since he had now firmly taken root in the labyrinth, he'd just regenerate if Diablo defeated him as he was. He had become a nearly immortal being, constantly replenishing his energy from the labyrinth's coffers, and worst of all, he had consumed Xeranus's body. Diablo had to admit that was a blunder. The combination of Viga's ability to eat everything and Xeranus's devastator virus, the power to control tiny, will-driven dark cells, was an incredible combo. Xeranus's dark cells were not, strictly speaking, cells or living organisms at all. They merely appeared to be, but now that Viga had them, their nature had likely changed into something a lot more troublesome. Fortunately, Viga himself was not aware of this. Perhaps it was a good thing he was such an idiot, although from Diablo's point of view, he was just this boar that wasn't even worth fighting. He wasn't driven by any belief system, he had no resolve at all, he couldn't control his own desires, he was an immature fool. This wasn't the sort of opponent that would ever give Diablo a surge of emotion, and there was no beauty to be found in that. Even Xeranus the Insect Lord, as emotionless as he seemed, had a passionate soul compared to Viga. If this is how it was going to be, I really shouldn't have turned him over to Zegan. Diablo regretted that a little bit. Either way, if things continued like this, it was going to lead to one very painful situation. It was Ramirez and her crew at the control center who failed to keep Viga isolated, but it was also Diablo's fault for overlooking that error. Resorting to excuses like the threat of Xeranus shook my concentration would never fly, Diablo was now determined to step up and deal with Viga. "Control center, are you aware of the situation?" "Of course. Lady Ramirez isn't in a condition to respond at the moment, so I'm taking over for now." "Roger. So there's one dog still on the loose here, but can I count on you to handle everything else?" "Yes. We've immediately changed the structure of the labyrinth, first thing. The 4 Dragon Lords and Hakuro are on standby on floor 100 at the hall Sir Valdora calls home. I'm not sure if they'd be able to defeat them, but they could buy some time, at least." As Benimaru stated, there was no need to go out of their way to defeat the Draco beasts currently doing their own thing. Once they killed their master, they could be easily handled after that. The Dragon Lords would be enough to address them, since they could revive as much as needed within the labyrinth, and with Hakuro also on the scene, things seemed pretty safe in their hands. You're always on the ball, Sir Benimaru. I see I had nothing to fear." "Not at all. Thanks for the advice. Don't try anything too crazy." "Surely you jest." With that, the conversation was over. Diablo looked at Viga, wondering how to handle this situation. As one could surmise from Diablo's and Benimaru's conversation, the control center was in a state of utter chaos. Ramirez, in particular, was beside herself, eyes darting around from place to place. This is so bad. My labyrinth's gonna be gobbled up." She had been shouting about that for a while now, but she seemed more interested in flying around and making a big fuss than actually doing anything. So at Benimaru's orders, assorted defense mechanisms in the labyrinth had been put online. They had a procedure outlined for exactly this sort of situation, and it was proving useful right now. "I'm reminded all over again how great Sir Rimuru is," muttered Benimaru. "Yes," said Shuna, her head drooping a bit. "I didn't think it was to this level, but just look at the situation we're in without Sir Rimuru. We have a lot to reflect on, I think." Rimuru always anticipated the worst when he acted. He was just overthinking things most of the time, but that approach never caused him harm, at least. Always assume the worst, he was in the habit of saying, and then you won't panic when the worst happens, right? That was the credo behind the almost excessive training he gave to his defense forces. But despite all that, here was the situation they were all in now. They seemed to be lacking in virtually everything, forced to face up to their own lack of foresight, and Benimaru had no choice but to regret his own inexperience. Lady Ramirez, please calm down. I'll help out as well, so let's start by isolating the corroded labyrinth floors, all right? Thraney was attempting to make Ramirez stop flying around at high speed. Benimaru needed her back to her senses soon, so he did what he could to help. She's right. Sir Rimuru always said to do what you can and do it right. I'll pitch in, too, so let's start with some safety measures first. Yes, added Beretta, no need to be reckless here. Benimaru agreed with that. There was something about Rimuru's words that just made him feel calmer. That, he felt, was the quality of a true leader. Yeah, you're right, said Ramirez. I totally wasn't freaking out, but if that's what you all say, I'll join the effort. The more frazzled you are, the more it helps when you have something to do, and if it's something you do as part of your normal routine, that makes it all the more effective. Ramirez, who was panicking about Vega taking away her ability, was finally showing signs of recovering. Benimaru was just as driven to fight, too. To him, the counterattack was just getting started. So what to begin with? Whenever starting something, the best practice was to follow the basics and scope out the current situation. Job 1 was to secure a safe space. The control center was the safest spot in the labyrinth. Benimaru's biggest concern was for his wives, and they had been evacuated to a waiting room next door. Letting them see how this battle was unfolding could potentially be bad for their unborn children, so he wanted them to be able to have some peace and quiet for the time being. Other children had also taken refuge in there, so Mumiji and Alvis should find it relaxing enough, and there were toys as well, so no one should be bored. They might yell at Benimaru later for treating them like children, but that was in the future. Next was Rimuru's cherished city, the capital of Tempest. Vega couldn't make it in here, either, not unless he broke through their final line of defense. All other exits had been sealed off, so the only way to access it was through Veldora's hall. The main force of floor bosses had been mobilized to defend it, which meant that each floor of the labyrinth was almost wholly undefended. There was nothing to stop the Draco beasts that Vega unleashed from invading, so Benimaru decided to concentrate the remaining forces in one place, as he explained to Diablo. It wasn't known yet, however, if this would be enough to counter the Draco beasts. Hakoro, in particular, was a concern. He was so eager to protect his future grandchildren that he had left without listening to Benimaru's attempts to stop him. He was certainly a powerful ally to have in the fight, but they couldn't afford to underestimate Vega's Draco beasts, and whether his swordsmanship would be enough to beat them was an open question. Of course, if they're connected to the corroded labyrinth by now, they'll just be reborn again and again. If you wanted to defeat them, you first had to isolate them from the rest of the labyrinth. In other words, it all came down to Ramirez. She was currently working as hard as she could to repair the labyrinth's function set and isolate Vega, as if to make up for her previous mistake. Thraney was apparently supporting her in various ways, Beretta also helping with the needed calculations. It seemed safe to leave things in their hands, or rather, given the situation, watching them at work was about all they could do. Benimaru recalled Rimuru's words. If you can imagine the worst possible situation, think about how you can prevent that from happening. Look for things that are absolutely indispensable for that and go from there. That way, the worst will stop being the worst. Just repeat that, he said, and you can find ways to stabilize the situation. With that in mind, Benimaru mulled over their current crisis. The worst possible outcome is if Vega takes the labyrinth away from us completely. If we can prevent that, we'll have plenty of time to get back on our feet. That was the conclusion he came to. If Vega got away from them right now, it'd be trouble, but they could still deal with it. They could always buy themselves more time, letting them think about countermeasures before they had to encounter him again. As long as they didn't lose the labyrinth, or more strictly, as long as their comrades and the townspeople were safe, they could stage a comeback. Then there's no problem, Benimaru thought, an assured smile on his face now that he had made up his mind. Ah, Benimaru. Why don't you look worried at all? You're, like, the vice commander, said Ramirez. Yes, I am, Commander. But it's simple if you think about it. Huh? We can just dispose of everywhere Viga's corroded. What? The labyrinth's in bad shape, that much is true, but it's only a matter of building it over again. We created it from scratch, after all, so maybe it'll turn out even better next time, right? I suppose, but then there's no time to hesitate. The residents are all evacuated, and we've also quarantined as many monsters as we could. I know it feels like a waste, doing away with all these things you worked so hard to create, but like Zaraimuru said, sometimes you need to know when to cut your losses. Yes, well, that's true. Ramirez nodded her agreement with Benimaru's imposing words. Those Draco beasts will lose the ability to regenerate, too, once they're cut off from their master. So let's quarantine the entire area where Viga's planted his roots, starting with the floor where Diablo and the rest are fighting. With as much force as he was putting into his words, Ramirez began to think that it might just be possible. She was pretty easily persuaded that way, so once she knew what she had to do, she quickly got on with it. At once, she froze all operations, including the rebuilding of the labyrinth. Keenly analyzing the safe floors, she then quarantined any floors that looked suspect to her. Floors 71 to 80, which were under Zijin's control, floors 81 to 90, which Kumara ruled over, and floors 61 to 70, where Adalman was rebuilding the castle with the Imperial soldiers, all of them were cut off. Adalman would likely be the saddest about it, but as long as there was no loss of life, they could always regain what they lost. Wow, what was I panicking about again? I can't say exactly, but I'll leave it to you to explain things to Adalman, all right? Hey, whoa. You're the one who told me to do it. What are you talking about, Lady Ramirez? You're the commander right now, aren't you? It's only natural for the responsibility to fall upon your shoulders. Benimaru flashed a gleeful smile. He was right, though, as speechless as Ramirez was about it. But she was clearly brighter now, too, which greatly relieved Thraney and Beretta. It's fine. I will explain things with you to Adalman. Indeed, I am sure he'll understand. Great to see you guys are always on my side, unlike Benimaru here. Ramirez glared at Benimaru as she pretended to be so greatly moved by her friends. It made Benimaru chuckle. All right. I'll go apologize to him with you, too, so don't exclude me, please, he. Well, if you insist. So now that Benimaru and I have made up, let's get this work done real fast. Seeing Ramirez in good spirits was a relief to everyone. It was now time to focus on the battlefield again, so they could settle things with Viga for good. Dino's group was struggling mightily against the two Draco beasts from Viga. Dino, in particular, was getting kind of desperate, running around weaponless and frantically calling for help. Everyone ignored him, though. There, you see? I get bullied by everybody. Apito and Beretta, too. He was still attempting to plead his case, but it wasn't about to win him anyone's forgiveness. Like I care, you freak. That's what you get for being so lazy, Dino. You've been that way forever, and now you're paying the price. Pico's right. If you had put in a real effort at any point, you wouldn't be running around like a fool right now. Any sort of reaction from them was appreciated, but then again, this was more than a little harsh, or, I don't know, I was pretty serious just a bit ago. I was resisting all that pain as best as I could anyway. Pico and Gasha looked at Dino like he was an idiot. Why would a spiritual life form with no sense of pain talk about resisting pain at all? What? Come on, you two. I got a lot of stuff to deal with, too. Dino was about to make more excuses, but they were quickly shot down, forcing him to rejoin the battle. God damn it. I thought you were my friend, Vega. What a lie. Such an obvious one. Ugh. Pico and Gasha were already back to picking on Dino. How can you say such careless things all the time? Even Mai was joining in. She had gotten too used to these exchanges not to, it seemed. It was enough to make Dino, at long last, give in. Okay, whatever. I guess even I will have to get a little serious about this. He looked up at the sky, as if he had given up on everything. But the next moment, with a deadly serious expression on his face. Divine Spirit Armor, manifest. For the first time in quite a while, Dino revealed his true form. Just like with Chloe, the hero's own Divine Spirit Armor, all the gear on Dino and his friends had now reached God class. They normally hid their true nature, but at this moment, all their abilities were released. What's more, Dino had put himself through the process of apotheosis. This was a feat that allowed a divine authority to be housed within a physical body. Dino, Pico, and Gasha had all set limits on their bodies while they were active on the surface of the planet. They had never released these limits before, so not even Dino was sure what would happen, but he decided to do it anyway. Now Dino's most powerful battle form was clear for all to see. He had 6 pairs of glittering black and white wings that made him into a truly radiant presence. A black minister-like spiritual robe covered his body, and 2 summoned swords were in his hands. One was gold, the other a dark silver. They were God class, of course, among the strongest of them all, forged from the core of a star, 1 holy blade and 1 demonic blade, white and black. Excalibur, which shone with a golden sheen, and Caliburn, a jet-black blade studded with stars. This was Dino's true form, a twin swordsman who skillfully wielded 2 blades that were the opposites of each other. Fighting with Fang Smasher was just a temporary style for him, the reason why Ramirez was sure that Dino wasn't taking things seriously. If he had broken those twin swords out earlier, he would have surpassed even Alberto and Glazord with his skill, for with them, he truly became the strongest swordsman in the world. It seems, said Zijin as he looked on admiringly, that you've broken the dream end seal that I carved into you. My eyes were not mistaken after all. Zijin recognized Dino for who he was. He had expected, to some extent, that he wouldn't be able to completely control Dino, and he knew he had some hidden powers as well. That's why he was able to leave Apito in his care. Huh? Oh, wow, you're right. Great, so now I'm no longer under your control. Or really, you never intended to kill me from the start, did you? Zijin gave Dino's smile a little chuckle. I am not at full strength yet. Diablo will take care of that thing, but can you handle the other minions? Oof. Well, I guess I have no choice. Leave the rest to me, then. Dino had no intention of betraying anyone from the start, but now he truly did feel like he was back in action. Perhaps that was why he finally got honest with himself and made a long overdue apology. I'm sorry, Ramirez. I didn't mean to betray you, but I had reasons deeper than the sea and higher than any mountain. Do you know what I mean? That was the best he could do, and he thought he sounded honest enough with it. But... Ho 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 ho. Well, it looks like I was right all along, wasn't I? All right, all is forgiven, Dino. So go beat those scary guys for me. Such was Ramirez's reaction. She had regained her composure a moment earlier, and now she was more relaxed overall. That's what allowed her to forgive Dino from the bottom of her heart, with as much generosity as she could manage. Dino was only half smiling about it, but inside, he did feel relieved. Apologizing was never easy, no matter how old you got. Seeing it all turn out well was a great relief. Now his expression tightened again as he looked at the Draco beasts he needed to defeat. Time for me to step in, he said, having his 3 struggling companions move aside. The sight of his transformation made Pico and Gasha overjoyed. Ah yes, it was that sort of thing, wasn't it? You actually look pretty cool. All right. Get moving, Dino. Blow those monsters away. You got it. And with that, he instantly chopped up the two dracobeasts. The sheer speed of it rendered everyone speechless. Whoa. That was actually cool, wasn't it? Mai was stunned, unable to believe her own eyes. People have trouble handling sudden changes like this. Dino had made it his business to show nothing but his bad side to everyone, and all of a sudden, he was as serious as a heart attack. That alone did wonders for his coolness factor, but instantly killing an enemy that Mai and the others were struggling hard against. Well, it was easy to admire him now. Pico looked so proud, like those exploits were all her doing, but her words were as harsh as ever. You could have just done that from the start, but no. Not even she could hide her happiness, though. Gasha was similarly taking deep breaths. It had been a long, long time since she had seen Dino like this, all the way back to when Veldinava was still alive. But his presence alone made her feel so much more secure. Now she couldn't see how they could lose, no matter the enemy. She had same feeling back then, too. Ugh. I can't believe how lazy he is. But despite her dismay, a natural smile appeared on her face. He would have been a lot happier giving in to his instincts and running wild, but Viga's senses had returned to him, if only a little. This was the parallel thought aspect of Azdahak, Lord of Dark Dragons, doing its work, independently deriving another sense of ego from a body that had gone out of control. At the same time, his current situation began to dawn on him. The amount of magicules in his body was now gigantic and growing. His existence points had ballooned, which was natural, since he had gobbled up the remains of Xeranus and was continually absorbing the labyrinth itself. By contrast, Diablo, the enemy he was trying to kill, was completely stable, showing no fluctuation at all. That scared him all the more. From the start, here was an opponent that was consistently well below Viga's numbers, but it was Viga being pushed around. He stretched out numerous tentacles to capture his foe. The demon scissors cut them all to pieces. He tried launching a powerful high-caliber beam, but it deflected off him. Diablo's skills were just that outstanding. He took every approach possible to escape from his fear of him, but it just didn't work. At this point, Viga finally understood that strength was about more than having a high EP. Victory depended on a combination of factors, including luck. He was faced with a critical lack of battle skills. After becoming decently strong without making any real effort, he only had experience with a simple rote sort of fighting approach. Diablo had stopped growing so that he could continue to enjoy fighting, but the difference between them was like heaven and earth, one impossible to bridge at all. There's no way I can kill this guy, but not like I'll get killed, either. Right now, Diablo was fighting extremely passively, not attacking at all. He wasn't aiming for Viga himself, like he had done when cutting up the Dracobeast. However, the intense pain from the blows he delivered earlier hadn't disappeared. If he took many more hits like that, it was bound to drain his spirit in time. And I don't get it. Maybe he's aiming for something else. Not being attacked like this was scaring Viga even more. Diablo had this fearless smile on his face, never doubting his victory and probably seeing Viga as a weakling of an opponent. That wasn't him bluffing, either. Viga understood what being weak was like. Despite his still growing omnipotence, there just wasn't any shaking off his fear of Diablo. Clearly, it was a sign that he'd never be able to beat him. In this case, the only option left for Viga was his usual move, fleeing. But that wasn't going to be too simple here. Viga was continuing to corrupt the labyrinth, albeit unconsciously, but the corrosion rate was only about 30%. That was pretty good progress, an amazing feat, in fact. But now he had a problem. Oh crap. There's nothing beyond this. Yes, his enemies were taking countermeasures. It looked like Viga was being quarantined again. Without any teleportation skills, Viga was caught in a situation he had no way to escape from. But there was still a possibility. If there were any of Viga's split-off cells left somewhere, he could completely revive himself from them. Of course, mere fragments of cells wouldn't cut it. He'd need a duplicate at least on the same level as his Dracobeasts. Preserving this duplicate would be impossible, since it would die once it got far enough away from Vega. This strategy might have sounded useless, then, but it wasn't. Vega could leave it on the far end of his sphere of influence, and it'd make a great insurance policy in case of emergency. In fact, he used a duplicate to escape the cunning, treacherous Testarossa earlier, a feat he could be proud of. Before diving into the labyrinth, he had left one duplicate outside the front door, although he had since lost contact with it because the labyrinth's interior and exterior operated on different dimensions. Right now, all he had left was the Draco beast heading for the bottommost floor of the labyrinth.